Welcome to episode 342 of the DFO Rundown presented by Bet365. Download the app today and use the promo code NATION, NATION, to get in on a huge range of markets. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Of course, you have Monday Night Football if that tickles your fancy at Bet365. Also, 3 games in the National Hockey League, the Blackhawks and Rangers, some recent trades, and firings and signings. We'll get to that. Ducks, Canadians, and Red Wings and Sabres as we welcome in Frank Saravalli, who is in Florida for the Board of Governors meetings. Frankie, how you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, busy weekend. A lot happening in the last 5 days or so, 4 days since we last talked.
Yeah, so let's start with the Rangers. The Trouba trade, then the Shesterkin signing, 8 years at 11.5. Let's start with Trouba and the trade, but also, Trouba explaining everything that kind of went down and the threat of waivers. And, he felt like he couldn't really be a proper captain. What'd you make of the whole Rangers scenario?
Well, I thought in the end, a massive win for Chris Drury and the Rangers. And I know that some people aren't going to like the way that Trouba was treated on the way out. And no one likes, getting a size 12 put to your ass and being told to make a decision. But the truth is, if he wanted the full no move clause, which comes with no waivers, then he should have had that for the final 2 years of his deal. And when that expired on July 1st, that opened the door for Chris Drury and the Rangers to apply a different pressure tactic to make a trade happen. I don't think they were singling out Jacob Trouba for, hey, finger pointing him saying you're the guy that, is responsible for where we are in the standings and the start of the season that we had. But they knew that something needed to change. And the easiest way to make something change is by moving out an $8 million salary that brings you all sorts of different salary cap flexibility. So the fact that the Rangers were able to make it happen and move on from Trouba's $8 million, not just this year, but also next, and do it in a way in which they didn't have to pay and actually receive something back, as slight as it was, I couldn't think of a better outcome for New York, despite all of the Broadway style drama.
Yeah, I look at the deal and it's all about how, obviously we know where most of the cap space has gone to. Now it's for Shesterkin next season, but for this year, now it's okay. You've got cap space, but what are you going to fill it with? And what are you going to have to give up to fill it with? Right. That's going to be the challenge for the Rangers now.
Yeah, but I think this allows you for a number of different possibilities now. Let's say you want to go out and you could add both a forward and a defenseman now for $8 million a year. And with the cap going up, now that they've gotten Shesterkin done and have achieved cost certainty in net, as expensive as it may be, at least now you can write it into your lineup card in Sharpie and not pencil, and it's not a hypothesis. So we can talk about the Shesterkin deal in a minute, but the fact that the Rangers have a ton of cap space that as each day passes now, they're continuing to accrue and bank it to the point of, or to the tune of, at the deadline, right? If they continue on this track, they'll have $27 million to spend. They've got the assets. They've got their first round picks. They've got a hunger and will to win. And they've got some players that are, in the very prime or end of the prime of their tenure that they need to make stuff happen before those guys end up moving on. And so I think this was partly about finding a better mix, partly about opportunity to come. But I think in the meantime, it's entirely dependent on the group that's there right now. Look at the standings today. And I know we're going to talk East wild card later, but you could ask the question right now, and it'd be a fair one to ask: are the Rangers even a playoff team?
Which is shocking because at the start of the season, everybody would have thought they're going to win their division, and now they're battling. you know what? They gave up 7 to Seattle. Now Shesterkin didn't play yesterday, which is, you just signed him to the huge money, and then he's not even playing in the game, which is a little bit odd. But yeah. Now, do you think the Rangers are done? Is Chris Kreider next?
I don't think so, because the thing I come back to with Chris Kreider is, well, 2 things. One, and this didn't save. I made this point a week ago with Zach Hyman being one of the best press players in the league. I think Chris Kreider is the best net front presence player in the league. I think it's really difficult to make a Kreider trade in season and have your team be better for it right then. And I don't think the Rangers are ready or willing to punt on this year or any other, particularly now in a year in which you have Shesterkin on a relative discount before that new deal kicks in. So I don't think Kreider's next. I think, if anything, now you begin to add with the space that you have, and you can begin trading away some of those picks and or prospects.
Now, I actually like this deal from the Ducks side too. I think young team, or teams that are younger, they're not super young, but they're younger. And Trouba, I like his honesty about the New York situation, where he found it was hard to be the captain when everybody in the room kind of knows they're trying to push you out. It's difficult to lead maybe how you should. We know what Pat Verbeek wants, how his team to play, wants a more physical presence. Trouba, and their salary doesn't matter. We all know he's not going to live up to being an $8 million player. They're not in a situation where his contract is going to hurt them cap-wise. They're not a cap team. They're not close to a cap team. And now they get a player who I think can help them learn how to be a professional. Trouba's a legit NHL player. There's no debate. He knows how to play the game. He plays hard. He plays physical. And I think he'll fit how Pat Verbeek wants to build their team. And that doesn't mean he's there long-term. Maybe he is. But I actually like this deal for Anaheim. And I'll tell you right now, Trouba and Radko Gudas on the same team, you're going to have to keep your head up a lot in Anaheim. They're not going to be a dominant team, don't get me wrong. But I actually like this trade from Anaheim's perspective.
I guess the only thing I come back to is, why would you bail out the Rangers? Does it help you enough that you need to sort of be the team that saves them?
Fair point. But obviously maybe he's not worrying about the Rangers. He's worrying about his own organization, is what I'm guessing.
I guess, but I think if you're Pat Verbeek, don't you have a responsibility, if you're the Ducks, to extract assets from the Rangers as opposed to giving some up to get him?
Yeah, well, that is valid. So it's interesting how some big contracts, teams add draft picks to get rid of, and then others, they obviously value and they feel that Trouba, and you're right, they probably could have got more out of it, but maybe at the end he just felt like, I need to make the trade, and I'm not gonna walk away from it if I don't. Now, were there other teams interested? I guess would be the question.
But look at just other simple salary cap dumps. Jake Wallman had 2 years left at 3.4. We're 26 games into Jacob Trouba having 2 years left at 8. In order to move on from Jake Wallman on the back end, the Red Wings have to give up a second-round pick. In order to move on from Jacob Trouba, the Rangers get stuff in return. They get a 4th and get a serviceable 6-7 defenseman.
So don't you think doesn't that show why it was a bad trade by Detroit?
Well, yes, but it also shows to me that when you look at the market and you look at how cap money moves, the Ducks just offered a bailout to the Rangers and gave something up to do it for a guy that is not part of their long-term future, may provide some valuable lessons between here and there. And maybe if you're lucky and you really squint hard enough, that you could take Trouba and flip him at the deadline and retain half. But even then, it's going to be difficult to do with some of the term left on his deal. So yes, different players, different value. I just, if we're talking responsibility to make his own team better, my thing is, then your responsibility is to extract assets and don't be the guy sitting there as a bailout.
Now, Vakanainen, how much of an asset do you think he is? Or wasn't that just, that was the salary here? You take this $1.1 million. What has he played? 5 games for the Ducks this year?
Yeah, he's also been hurt. So he arrived with an upper body injury. I'd say he's a 6'7" is what he is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Trouba can play more. I think he will play more in Anaheim than he was in New York. And so they looking at their team. And you're right. Sometimes, hey, maybe if you can get the best deal, but I like this deal for Anaheim. I think their team, we know where they're trying to go. And I think this helps them get there. And you need more NHL players. You don't, of course, you would love to get elite players. And sometimes you can't always stare at the cap hit when for right now in Anaheim, cap hit's that's not what's going to derail their team. Like Trouba making $8 million, more than he probably should for what he puts up, it's not going to impact them. Whereas if you're a cap crunch team and you're competitive and you're trying to go for the cup, then if you have a guy who's, making way more than he should, well, that impacts you, right?
I guess I see it as way more a win for the Rangers than anything for the Ducks.
Okay. What about the Rangers and the Shesterkin deal?
Man, it's a fascinating one. Obviously the largest deal ever for an NHL goalie. Also, when you see how massive this deal is, and then you see news like Juan Soto getting $765 million over 15 years, it also makes you realize what a different planet a lot of these sports are than the NHL. But Shesterkin locked up now for the foreseeable future. I understand the leverage that he had as this team's best player and their unquestioned MVP. And we've seen, if anything, an over-reliance on Shesterkin that's made this Ranger team pretty good. I just have a really hard time knowing what we know about goalies, knowing the fickle nature of the position. And yes, there are a few exceptions, and perhaps Shesterkin is one of them. I just have a really hard time committing that much term and that much cap space to a goalie. And it's a pure philosophical thing. For me, I think you have to take out the player and the situation and your reliance on him. And you can't be pressured into making a deal based on what your current circumstance is. And I think you have to look at it holistically. I know that's sometimes how philosophies get thrown out the window, but I can't help but look at the great goaltending that the Toronto Maple Leafs have gotten this year, or the Washington Capitals, or pick a team that's won a Stanley Cup without paying a goalie, Colorado, Vegas. Like, all these teams have been able to accomplish it without chewing up such a big part of their salary cap on a goalie. And I just think that's the direction that the sport is going, even though we've seen a big crackback this year with Swayman and Ottinger, and now Shesterkin, who resets the market. It's more philosophy for me than anything else.
Well, 11.5 mil, which I looked at the Carey Price deal. Carey Price, people who like to go percentage of cap, the day he signed his was 14% of the cap. Today, Shesterkin is 13% as the highest paid guy, right? Did the Carey Price deal long-term work out? No. Now injuries, sure. Obviously that's part of it, but injuries can always be a part of it. That's a really hard position to play late into your 30s now, right? They say it's demanding. That's why starting goalies in their 20s aren't playing as many games as they used to. They say it's too difficult. Okay. And a lot of the goalie position, when I hear if a starting goalie isn't having great success, well, the environment that he plays in impacts his ability. Okay. Well, when we talk about elite forwards, do we ever hear, well, their environment and their teammates are why they're not living up to their offensive contract? I never hear that. So it's just a different position. And if you're going to pay someone that much money who's going to miss a quarter of your season automatically, and I know that you're saying, hey, we're paying him for the playoffs, and maybe that's the hard part, is that you need him more in the playoffs when you don't pay him than you do. Well, you don't necessarily don't pay him, but you know what I mean? There's no cap hit. Than you do in the regular season.
Now,
that's the challenge, right? And if you look at Shesterkin's numbers in New York the last few years, right? Like it was 3 years ago when he had his great .935 save percentage and 220 goals against. Since then, he's been like 916, and he's .905 this year. And if you look at the backups, and I just look at goals against, like everybody, save percentage is one stat, but I'm like, goals against to me is the one that matters, right? Because goals against are what you face 30 shots and give up 2 goals, and a lot of those shots are fluff shots. Does that mean the goalie's better than the goalie who faces 20 shots and has a 900 save percentage, right? It's all relative somewhat. To me, it's about how many goals does he give up. And when you look at the goals against in 2022, it was 262 for Shesterkin. Their backup's 271, right? Now he's only making $5 million. So moving forward, if you're going to pay him 11, his numbers got to be so much better than your backup to make it really worthwhile. And that's going to be the challenge.
So are we agreeing on this?
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Yeah, I think this is a contract that is not going to age well. I think the first few years will be great. Like Shesterkin, look at this. He's 2 years younger than Hellebuck and makes $3.5 million more.
Now, okay, so we had this chat before, but I want to make sure that we're both on the same page, because Bobrovsky is nearing the end of his 7-year, $70 million deal that pays him 10 a year.
Yes.
Some would argue that because the Panthers won a cup during this tenure and he played such a critical part in it, that contract has been worth it. Is that contract a good contract or a bad contract?
Well, the last 3 years for sure, right? Because it's not just winning the cup. I think they went to the cup final. He was very good that year. I think that contract illustrates the position. It's a volatile position, even for a guy who's an elite goalie. Because make no mistake, Bobrovsky's elite. He's won multiple Conn Smythes. Now he's won a cup. Before he got his contract, he was an elite goalie. Now they kind of bid against themselves, and later on it worked out. But the deal worked out because management made a lot of other really good moves. Bennett, Tkachuk, Reinhart, go down the list of those acquisitions. So one signing is never going to win it for your team. It gave him a good goaltender, no question. Had some rough patches for sure. But for this deal to ever win, the Rangers are going to have to be, well, it can't just be Bobrovsky. They got to go out and find Reinhart, Tkachuk, and Bennett. And that's pretty damn hard.
Yeah, it is. I always think about what the deal was like in the situation that you signed it. And I don't care what anyone says. If the Panthers won 2 cups during this tenure, I'll still say that that's a horrible contract. They signed it and gave him that deal at $10 million per at a time in which they had no competition to do it. There was only one other team in the market at that time, the New York Islanders, that was willing to pay Bobrovsky. By the way, willing to pay Bobrovsky something. Definitely, the Islanders weren't going to give Bobrovsky $10 million a year. They outbid themselves. The Panthers did under Dale Talon, and so I have a really hard time with that one. And I'm starting to look at this one not in a similar vein, but tell me who was going to beat this Shesterkin deal. Like, what was the real threat to do it?
Dude, that's what I said. I'm like, let's go through the teams who would look at a goalie and say, we're going to pay him $11.5 million. It might have been a bottom feeder team.
It's not even that. It has to be more than that, because the Rangers are the only team that could offer 8 years.
Yeah, fair point.
Like if you're gonna get medieval with no trade clauses and say, hey, we'll put you on waivers if this doesn't work out, you've also got to be medieval in your negotiation and say, hey, you know what? We're the only team that can offer the 8th year. And if you don't get a deal done with us, we are not trading your rights to someone else before July 1st in order to facilitate you getting the 8th year somewhere else. We're just not willing to do it. So it's either 8 years with us or 7 years with someone else, and good luck matching this money elsewhere. And then you cap it and you make him put his money where his mouth is. Okay, you turn down 11 times 8. Okay, now our new offer is 10. I don't know. See what happens. And I know that that's not what people want to do with their best player, but I just feel like when you think about this type of situation, I'm still struggling. Maybe Vegas. Tell me which team was going to step up and pay more than what the Rangers could offer over 8 years.
Yeah. Well, it'll be hard for sure. Yeah. Well, you can never count out Vegas. That's a good example. There's
But think
lots of
about how
teams.
think about how this weekend ends up shaping up. You've got the lingering, bad taste in some people's mouth from Trouba, and then that gets completely washed away. Oh, look at the excitement of getting Shesterkin done. Onward.
Yeah, well, and Shesterkin got a full no movement clause, by the way, for anybody wondering, for all 8 years. So, the other thing, Frank, your point about turn with goalies is very accurate. It's a highly volatile position, even for the great ones. It's highly volatile, and you're into your mid to late 30s at the high stress of that position, mentally and physically. It's a big risk, and to me, the Rangers, their management team is going to have to make a lot of other good moves for this deal to work. The good news is Shesterkin, when he's on his game, is easily top of his game. He's top 3 goalies in the league. I don't think there's much question about that. And so all they say is, you know what, maybe we'll go through the ups and downs of the regular season that happen every now and then. But we believe if we're in the playoffs, we're always going to have a chance.
It's a great feeling to have. It's such a good security blanket. But Bobrovsky's still the one and only 8-figure goalie in AAV to win a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, well, Vasilevsky won it twice at 9.5, so it's close. But you're right on technicality. He was pretty good. Now some other big changes, because it was, what do you make of the Blackhawks, the Luke Richardson firing?
I know this is an unpopular opinion, but watching that team pretty closely, it felt like it was time. They just look sloppy and disjointed, and too much when you watch that team, too much one and done in the offensive zone, get a shot, and half the time it felt like it was a breakout pass for the other team going the other way. And then in their own end, not nearly enough kills, not enough not enough attention to detail, that when you go through a lot of it, look, it's not all on Luke Richardson. A lot of the players that the Hawks acquired over the summer, Bertuzzi, Teravainen, I mean, you got Taylor Hall back healthy. He ends up being a healthy scratch. These guys have needed to play a lot better. And then you see Bedard's game and some regression. You see some frustration. It felt like they needed something different. And it really sucks for Luke Richardson, because he gets a team for 2 years that's in the tank, and they're on their way out. And to only get 26 games of that, that's really hard. That's a tough gig. And I think they recognize that. I think Luke Richardson recognizes that. And moving forward, I just think, even just for Bedard, they need someone who can speak his language. And Anders Sorensen can do that. He's someone that has worked with the Nylander boys, William and Alex, since they were like 6 and 7 years old. Basically, wherever the Nylanders went, Sorensen went. If you're in the US, he's coaching them with the Chicago Mission. If they're in Sweden, he's in Sweden. He's that trusted. He coaches and has coached high-end players. He coached David Pasternak in Sweden. And I just think it's not better, but definitely different, that Luke Richardson was a 1,400 game stay-at-home defenseman. That's just a different language than what Anders Sorensen can speak to Bedard and to others on how to try and do things a little bit differently in Chicago.
Yeah, they're going to try to get, I read a lot of the stories, hey, they're too defensive, and that could be valid. It is funny that now their first game was the Jets. So, they'd scored 2 goals in the first period, and then they had 6 shots the rest of the game when they led 2-1. So it's not going to be an instant snap your finger. It's fair to say Bertuzzi, I think, had played a total of like 40 minutes with Bedard 5-on-5 all year long. So you're like, if you're going to sign the guy, you probably should maybe play him in a situation with your best offensive player to see what you can get from him, right? I'm a big believer in that. I don't sign guys to say, hey, this guy's going to help us offensively, and then not put him in your best offensive situation, at least at some point. So, but I think the
disagree with that,
Blackhawks.
by the way.
Why?
Well, the biggest thing that the Hawks needed is support. Like, so last year in Bedard's rookie year, if you're an opposing team, the only game plan was shut down Bedard and we win the game. You need other lines that can contribute and can be a threat. It can't all just be loaded on one line, and the Hawks are still too thin to. You have to ask the question. They put Teravainen in there to see if he could be one guy who could think the game like Bedard does, and I think he can. And then the other key would have been, hey, let's put Taylor Hall there. Let's see if we can develop some chemistry with these two guys because they had such a limited run the prior year. That hasn't worked. Teravainen fell off a milk carton. It can't all be on one line. You can't just stick Bertuzzi there because you signed him a little bit longer term than everyone else and say, hey, yeah, this should work.
I know, but do you know who his second most common line mate was? Kurashev. So that's my point. If you're going to play Teravainen there, no problem. You want to split it up, but you're putting a guy in his line who's doing absolutely squat, and you just kept doing it. That's the part I didn't understand. Right? If I would have given Bertuzzi and Hall more opportunity. Like Hall played in like 108 minutes of 5-on-5, Frank, is like 9 games. You know what I mean? So that's all I'm saying. I don't think he used it there. It's not working with Kurashev and what you're doing. So switch it up. Like you're going to be 32nd anyway, right? Like this is not a year. The Hawks weren't going to win. So if you want your best player to feel good about their game, then try to put them with your best guys and switch it up more. And that was my only criticism, was I felt like they didn't do that. So we'll see. I'll be curious to see Mark, the teammates of Bedard, who he plays with the remainder of the season. And I think it's going to be very different.
I think that was another thing that really hurt Luke Richardson, was that they changed lines almost every game. 87 different line combinations, it felt like. And, you know, it's interesting, the coaching change, though, because I know the Hawks lost their opener under Sorensen, who's the first Swede ever behind an NHL bench as a head coach. But then you look at the Blues, and they've been hot under Jim Montgomery, who's seemingly totally changed the vibe there. The funny thing about that is I don't see the Blues and the Hawks on paper as in that big of a discrepancy in terms of talent.
Oh, I do. The Blues got way better team, way faster. I think they got more skill. They got a way better defense core. Yeah, no, I think St. Louis is a much better team.
How much better?
Oh,
you think
quite
the Blues are a playoff team?
They're going to battle they'll be right in the wild card mix. I didn't pick them as a playoff team, but I thought the Blues could be an 85+ point team. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I thought the Hawks would get closer to 75 than anything else.
Yeah, I didn't. I wasn't
both
a big
non-playoff teams. How big of a discrepancy is it?
Yeah, I didn't think the Hawks roster. I wasn't buying on the Hawks at all. And honestly, the Hawks should be happy. I know this Hawks fans might like to hear this. They should be doing cartwheels where they're at. They're in year 2, really, of a true rebuild. We can talk about Vlasic, and he was drafted earlier, and that's great. But this is really from when they decided to go scorched earth and really tear it down. It's like year 2. And they don't have a ton of other guys. Like Bedard needs another top end guy. That's just a fact, right? Like Crosby had Malkin, Taves and Kane, and also had Seabrook and Keith, and McDavid had Draisaitl, and go to Darnell Nurse, and now Evan Bouchard. Like you need more guys. Like Chicago's a long ways away.
I agree. I just think that this year was supposed to be a lot different.
Yeah, but I think they had unrealistic expectations for where their team. I heard it all about, they're going to be more competitive. Like you don't become competitive through free agency. It might be the final piece of the puzzle.
Though. Like in the sense, not saying, of course you don't get better in free agency. Those guys were just stopgaps. They were warm bodies that brought in to support, which is why most of them only got 1 or 2 years. But you mean to tell me that the Sharks are better than the Hawks?
Well, you look at the Sharks team. Yeah, well, I'll give them credit, man. Their defense isn't great, but they play hard. But they're young guys. Celebrini's played better than Bedard when he's in the lineup, right? That's just the truth. People might not like it. I'm not saying he's better long term, but he's played better so far this year, right? Tyler Toffoli's
isn't that
come
reason
in
enough to make a coaching change? Like you have like you can't have Bedard languish the rest of the year. And I know that wasn't the reason why they did it, but this guy's snapping a stick one time per game on the bench.
Well, you can question that a little. Like maybe you got to. Hey, frustration's part of the NHL, man. It's a tough league, and thinking that in year 2 you're just going to rocket up the standings. Well, it's great to want to believe that. There also has to be a sense of reality. And the Hawks lineup wasn't good. They weren't rocketing up the charts at all. And it's not like San Jose is great here. Let's not kid ourselves, right? Like they played a lot of games, so they look, kind of better overall, but they look more competitive for sure than Chicago does, right? What they got? 7 more points, but they played 3 or 4 more games. So, they got 2 more wins. Like it's not like they're absolutely, crushing it by any stretch of the imagination.
Before we move on, one more quick thing on the Hawks. This Peter Mrazek injury is certainly less than ideal.
It's going to kill him.
Well, it's gonna hurt because Arvid Soderblom is running out of waiver exemption, and Laurent Brossoit had that second sort of procedure to try and clean up his situation, and he's still out. So Soderblom needs to play, and with 2 additional games or 3 additional games, he loses his exemption. And at that point, if Brossoit is back and healthy, and Soderblom has played mostly now because he has to play, in order to send Soderblom down, he'd have to go through waivers. And I can tell you for almost certain that Soderblom is not clearing waivers at 25 with the numbers that he's put up.
Yeah. Well, they'll just carry 3 goalies, right? Or Mrazek might just be out for a while. Who knows? But I won't be surprised. Lots of teams are carrying 3 goalies now.
Yeah, I'm saying it's just not ideal. Like the ideal sort of situation would have had Soderblom go down and keep playing, but no one really wants to keep 3 goalies. So just saying from a league-wide standpoint, Soderblom definitely would have some value.
Oh, God. Teams would be, especially at the goaltending position, 25-year-old, that's like the peak age where goalies start to suddenly find their game at the NHL on average. So I could see why teams would line up if the Blackhawks tried to squeeze them through waivers. I don't think there's any chance, and they'd be foolish to do it. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Let's bring in Tyler Yaremchuk to the pod. Ty, how you doing?
What's up, boys? Ready to go? New edition of Buy or Sell, brought to you by our friends at Bet365. Download the app, use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Let's stay on the topic of the Blackhawks. The Blackhawks will next make the playoffs in blank. What year, Greggs?
Oh, it's a ways away, man. I say, so this will be year 2 of Bedard. I'll say year 5.
So next year's 3, and then okay, 3 more years. Frank?
So you're saying 2027, 28.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to say 2026, 27. So 1 year earlier.
Okay.
The Hawks are going to have a pile of money to spend in free agency this year. I'm not saying that they're going to go out and break the bank, but can you get a high-skilled player to go out and play with them? I think that's probably on the table. What if, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but what if Marner is available? I don't think he's a great fit, but what if you were to go out and spend big to get Marner? Just a hypothetical. Does that change your viewpoint?
No, it's one guy. It would make them more, they wouldn't be 30th. They might be 21st. So, or 32nd, I guess they're probably going to be. So it all depends. Like you can spend money. It's got to be the right fit. Hello, Nashville.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let me follow up on that then, because you mentioned Marner, and I know there's talk about Rantanen and his new deal and how he maybe wants more than McKinnon and some complications there. So if you're a team like the Hawks, there is a blank % chance that one of Rantanen or Marner actually hit the market, Frank.
One of them, I'd say it's pretty high. I still think the odds are pretty high that Marner ends up being on the move. That's just me. I can't predict how the Maple Leaf season is going to go, or if this is the year that they break through. Maybe that's a different story. I still can't see Rantanen going anywhere. I understand his craving to get more, saying, hey, this is a cap percentage question than anything else. Do you want to win or not? You've got only one opportunity to play with McKinnon and Makar. If you want to go somewhere else because you've won one already, I don't think anyone would fault you for that. But again, you're dealing 8th year and 7th year. How big of a difference is it really going to be for you? And in the end, do you bleep with happy?
Yeah. Greggs, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing is, well, I guess if they're just chasing the money, they don't care where they're going. Chicago's a great city, and you do have Bedard, so maybe that could be the one selling feature that they would have. But the 14 mil for Rantanen just doesn't make sense because he's not in Draisaitl's category, and he just signed for 14. So that's why, even if he wants it, I think other GMs are like, hey, man, we really like you, but like you're not Leon Draisaitl.
Yeah, that's fair. Draisaitl, though, I think if you would have gone to pure free agency and there would have been a bidding war, he's probably a lot higher than 14, or not a lot, but he's higher than 14, right?
I don't know.
Everyone's always higher on the market. That's the truth, is whatever you think. Yeah, and it only takes one team, right? Like,
yeah,
that's the difference.
It only takes one, but then it takes a team that the guy wants to go to. Like, if you're just chasing money, then you're right. But I do wonder, at some point, yeah, okay, wow, I got 14 and I'm on a crap team for the next 8 years. Like, geez, I could have got 12 and a half. The happiness of that extra $1.5 million at that point is nothing. It doesn't even impact your life. So
well, that's the same argument everyone made with Juan Soto now. Like, you go to the Mets for $5 million. You just got 765. What's that extra 5 gonna, like? Do you have a better chance to win with the Yankees or the Mets?
Yeah, that was nuts.
Or the
he's still in New York though, so he's looking at lifestyle. He's just like, just gonna go to a different stadium, I guess.
Yeah. Next one for you guys. You talked about the Ducks acquiring Jacob Trouba. It's interesting to look at their blue line. Like, all their good young guys, Lacombe, Minchikov, Zellweger, they're all lefties. So with the Ducks acquiring Trouba, that has some people talking about Cam Fowler and his potential availability. There is a blank % chance that the Ducks trade Cam Fowler this season. Greggs, you're up.
Ooh, I think Fowler, man, I like Cam Fowler a lot. And I think there's not a boatload of available defensemen. And so if the Ducks are probably, you're going to have to retain something. That's just the reality of it at the deadline, more likely than anything. I'm going to say 68%, 70. I'll go 70. I think there's a pretty high chance, maybe even higher, that he gets dealt.
Frank?
Yeah, the first number that came to mind was 70 for me. I think there's a pretty solid chance. And look, he's nearing a milestone, which I think they're going to be respectful of. 1,000 games as a Duck. He'd only be the second player to do it, all in a Ducks uniform. He's been through a lot there, some great times and some rough years. We've seen other players in similar positions. Claude Giroux, I think, got to an even 1,000 with the Flyers, if I'm not mistaken, and ended up being on the move. So it does happen. And I think probably in relative, it'll line up schedule wise closer to the deadline. I think he's only 12 games away or something like that. After that gets done and celebrated, that you'll probably hear that talk ramp up a bit.
Fair. All right. There we go. Oh, actually, I did have a follow-up on that too. Blank % chance Jacob Trouba finishes his contract with the Anaheim Ducks, or is this going to be something next deadline where, like, retained or double retained and he's off to another contender? Frank?
Oh, I think there's a pretty good likelihood. I don't even know if it'll wait till next deadline.
Oh,
The
maybe
Ducks
this
had
summer.
to be thinking, we're going to get a benefit from him, have him add some toughness to our lineup, show our kids what it's all about, how to be a pro, and then we're going to move on.
Greg's.
Yeah. If they're trading Fowler, might be a little bit harder to move both, but I would say, yeah, you know what? I think he might re-sign there at a lower value because they're going to want a veteran guy. It just depends on cash. I think if he likes it there, I think I wouldn't be surprised if he signs there, right? If it's and really, he's made it very open that family first for him, and I respect that a lot, right? You got a partnership, and sometimes we talk about you want to be as close to even as you can sometimes in your partnership with your wife, and I think he's pretty cognizant of that. So it would probably depend a little bit on her job as well.
Fair. All right, boys, there you go. That's a wrap on this week's edition of Fill in the Blank, brought to you by Bet365.
Now, looking at the Ducks, January 2nd would be the 12th game for Fowler if he plays all 12. So that's when you get to game 1,000. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that, they'll get to that milestone. That still gives you ample time, almost, 2 months leading up to the trade deadline. So they'll have lots of runway to make a deal. And I think there'd be lots of teams interested in signing Cam Fowler. Now, let's get to the second half of the pod, brought to you by Fountain Tire, where you have until the 14th to stop in. You can save up to $225 on a set of 4 select tires, including Goodyear. Stop in at Fountain Tire because they specialize in not only tire and auto service, so you don't have to settle for both a good deal or good customer service, because at Fountain Tire, they'll do both. They'll treat your vehicle like it's their vehicle. Find a location near you at fountaintire.com and book an appointment. The race, Frank, for the wild card in the East is I don't know if it's a turtle derby or what you call it, but you've got the Lightning at 30 points. They just got Kucherov back and were victorious. Him and Point looked unreal in Vancouver, but they might have lost Sorelli. We'll get to that in a sec. The Rangers are at 29. The Islanders are at 29. Philly, Penguins, 28. Columbus is at 27. Now, the thing is, the Rangers and Lightning have played the fewest games, 25 for Tampa, 26 for New York. So if you look at the points percentage, like Tampa's at 600, whereas the Islanders and the Flyers and the Blue Jackets are all at 500, and the Penguins are actually below 500. So is it as close as we think, or is it a matter of games played right now?
No, I think it's pretty close. Like, in theory, it really shouldn't be. Like, I think the 8 teams that are in spots today are going to end up being the 8 teams that make the playoffs. The question will be in which order. But do you have any concern about the Rangers? Like, the longer the skid drags on, are you like, what's your level of concern?
Well, I guess now Shesterkin didn't play, so is there any concern about his health? Because if that's the case, Frank, if you look at the amount of chances that team has given up, and then if all of a sudden Shesterkin is out for any period of time, that would be a concern to me. So I don't know if it was just precautionary. I haven't seen anything. I was in Brooks all weekend, so at a hockey tournament, so I wasn't following his health status very closely, but I just find it odd. You sign a guy to the huge deal, and then he doesn't even dress the next game, but just maybe coincidence.
His wife was having a baby.
Oh, okay.
So
well, there's no
healthy.
injury. Okay. All right. So if Shesterkin's healthy, then they'll figure a way out of it. That's what I'll say.
But to be fair, though, like, they haven't played well with him the last few weeks.
No, it's totally valid.
And that's my point is
they're in a fun. Maybe it's because I don't have a boatload of confidence in any other teams chasing them. That might be I don't think the Rangers are the way they're playing. If it continues, do I look at them to be a real threat? Probably not. But do I think they have more talent than the Islanders, the Penguins, and the Flyers? Although the Penguins have played a little bit better of late, right? Columbus is the one team that they don't have a lot of talent, but God, they work hard. And they beat the Jets pretty handily here. Like they're not an easy out by any stretch. Even though like they do it more with offense than defense, which is kind of funny. But because you wouldn't expect that, I don't think, out of Columbus, especially with the pass in Johnny Gaudreau. Yet offense is probably their forte over defending. Werenski's been unreal. He should probably be the leader today for the Norse. I know people look at team record, but Werenski's been fantastic. But I think it's more, Frank, I don't have as much faith in the other teams, and I think the Rangers can do enough to beat them.
The Blue Jackets have scored more than 3 teams currently in playoff spots.
Oh, yeah, they can score goals, man.
It's just wild.
Like, they're entertaining.
I don't know that anyone was looking at that team on paper saying that they're going to be a team that scores.
Hey, buddy, Marchenko might be the one player no one talks about who's really fun to watch off, like just his whole game, man. I like it. Kent Johnson, it's unfortunate he's dealt with injuries this year, but he's been really good. Werenski's been absolutely unreal for them, like unreal. So it's fun to see that team, especially when you consider everything that's gone on around their organization this year. And but you're right. Like, I don't think anybody would have had them pegged where they are offensively right now. Like,
no chance.
And they create a ton. Like, they create a lot. Now they give up a lot. We can't just. But I you know what? In today's NHL, I'd much rather watch a little bit of fire wagon hockey than lose. If you're gonna lose, I guess lose by 4-3, 5-4. Your fans are entertained than losing 2-1 or 3-1 all the time.
Now, let me ask you about the West, though, because this team I've been watching pretty closely for the last few weeks, and it hasn't been pretty. It's been up and down. What do you make of the Dallas Stars?
Yeah.
Just an early season malaise? Like,
yeah, hey, you talked about it last pod. Like, where's Robertson, man? Like, that any team, when you go, we're a third of the way into the season now, right? 27 games. You're a third of the way into the season. And Jason Robertson has 5 goals. I don't know if he scored last night. Maybe he had 6, but he is not close to being what they wanted or expected or need from him in the amount of minutes and where he plays in your lineup. So, losing Sagan, that's the other thing. He was a point a game player. He had 20 points in 19 games. That's a quietly, I think, a bigger loss than some people think for Dallas. Like, he's basically out the regular, 4 months. He's out for a long time. So I still think I'm not that concerned at all about Dallas, but right now they definitely don't look like that they're a dominant force like they would have been at this time last year, right? Like, a lot of people thought going to the playoffs, Dallas was a 100% legit competitor, and they can probably still get back to it, but they're not playing nearly as well now as they did last year.
They're 5th in the West, and through the same number of games are only 2 points up on the Oilers, who had an awful start to the year.
Yeah, well, Edmonton.
That's pretty surprising.
Yeah, Edmonton they've come on. They're 10-7-2, I think, in their last 15-7-2 since their 0-3 start. Like, they are kind of, who most of us thought they were at the start of the season, right? They're a good team. Zach Hyman scoring, shocking. Of course he'd score. But you're right. Like, Dallas, it's funny. If you have a bad start, it really gets talked about. But if you have a bad mid-November, it's kind of like, they'll get over it. It's just it's an interesting, how you view things. When it's your only starting point, when it's bad, it gets like 10 times the amount of frustration and concern.
It's not that, but that frustration is actually warranted, though, because it becomes a math problem. When you have already banked a certain number of points and you're in the race, and you have to have other teams catch you and drag you out of the race, it's a lot different story. Like, the Stars created, with their good start, tons of wiggle room for them to have this malaise that they're in right now.
But they're 6-4 in their last 10. Is it that bad?
It was, yeah. I mean, okay, so you just did the math on the Oilers, what they've been since their 0-3 start. Let me just pull up quickly where the Stars are at, given where they started. They were 11-5 out of the gate. They're 6-5 since then. It's a big difference. Yeah. 11-5 versus 6-5. Just is.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, even the Jets, the Jets, it's impossible to keep up their 15-1 start, right? Like they're 5-8 since. There's always going to be like, if Dallas's dip is a 6-5, it's like, okay, like, at some point you probably have that 10-game stretch where you go 5-5, unless you're the Rarity Bruins and Tampa Bay those years where they go off. But I think, to me, for Dallas, I'm not concerned yet. Now, if they have another 10-game stretch, although they are 6-4, but if their next 10 is like 4-6, then you're like 10-10 over 20 games. You're like, well, are they more this than what they were to start? I think by then it's probably a fair question, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt because I look at their roster and, it's not like they're 3-6-1. You know what I mean? So I'm not concerned yet.
Okay. So the Jets started 15-1.
Yeah, they're 5-8.
And after starting 15-1 through now 29 games of the season, they're not even in first place in their division.
Yeah, well, the Wild, dude, the Wild have been really good.
Do you know how hard that is to do, though, to start 15-1 and not be in first place in your division 14 games later?
Yeah. Well, it's hard when the other team is the Wild, right? Like the Wild, I give them credit. They've been good. And I think the Wild have games in hand too. So it probably looks even like they could be 3-4 points ahead if they win those games in hand. So the Jets, like that start was crazy though, right? Like obviously it's, the greatest start in NHL history. It was going to be hard to maintain it, but you're right. They've probably dropped farther than we expected. I don't think people thought they'd go from 15-1 to 5-8.
No, they also had a crazy road trip too that was forever long. And they played some good teams. Like when you run into the last 4 games of your trip are Minnesota, LA, Vegas, Dallas, that's a tough run.
Now, we talked about the 8 in the East. Wild, Jets, Stars, Golden Knights, Kings, Vegas, and then Oilers, Avalanche. Are those the 8? Calgary is now out of a playoff spot as of their loss last night. Do you see any team, Calgary, Seattle, Utah, St. Louis, because San Jose, Anaheim, Nashville, Chicago are too far out, I think. Can any of those teams get in a playoff spot, or is the 8 we see today likely the 8 we see in mid-April?
I think statistically that the 8 we see now are likely to be the 8 that we see later. And that came at a time just when I said a couple weeks ago, hey, the Flames, this team could be a playoff team. And I think they're 0-4-1, or I think 0-4-1 since they said that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. The Flames were, they were winning because they're getting really good goaltending, but they can't score. And it's a more offensive. The New Jersey Devils used to be able to win in low scoring. Can't really win in low scoring games consistently now in the NHL. You got to have some offense, and the Flames they don't have enough offense. It's just how it is. At some point, you got to be able to score more than 3 goals in a game.
But here's the thing. When I said the Flames could make the playoffs, by the way, I said it, and they've gone 1-4-2 since then, since the day I said it. But I said that was predicated on getting great goaltending. Just look at the goals that they've given up. In that stretch, 4-5-6, 4-6. Yeah, there was a shutout there. There was another game in there that they only gave up 2. But 6-4-6, 5-4. It's not going to get it done.
Yeah, but dude, they haven't scored 4 goals in a game since October 13th.
I get it, but that's what I said. Their run, part of it was, the scoring has been an issue, but they'd gotten goaltending. Both their guys were in the mid, they were in the mid-19s in terms of their save percentage. Yeah,
which I thought eventually that would come down to, right? It's a lot of pressure, a lot of chances. You get the more video, like goalie coaches and everybody, the more video they get on opposing goalies. Kevin Woodley's told every goalie has a weakness, and it's the good analysts will find a way. The goalie scouts, what's the tendency, and they'll find that weakness. And I think that they've done that. in Calgary a little bit, but it's also just the fact that when you're always not scoring, I think it just starts to wear on guys, and there's more pressure, and you get down to, oh God, here we go again. We're not going to be able to score, and you just that is 25 consecutive games without scoring more than 3 goals. It's especially, it's funny. They had 6, 6, and 4 in their first 3. And you think, hey, maybe the Flames will score, but 25 games in a row without scoring 4 goals in today's NHL. It is, that's got to be close to a record, man. You can't even get an empty netter, Frank.
Yeah. The one time that they scored more, it was a shootout goal.
Yeah, so it's on the official stats page, and goals for it's only 3, right? Because shootout doesn't give you a goal.
Hard to do.
So, yeah. Now, hey, have you noticed my boy Shane Wright? Maybe we want to text your NHL exec, ask how he's doing lately. 6 goals, 9 points, last 8 games.
I'm still not concerned.
Yeah.
Do you know why? Because the bet isn't Shane Wright going to be okay? The bet was, who's the better player, Shane Wright or Matty Beniers?
Yeah, down the road. So,
okay.
Yeah, but you guys scoffed like it was not even a competition. So we'll see. Like I said, it's not a sprint. It's not a sprint. The biggest mistake in the NHL is still people, for whatever reason, think the young players, it's a sprint. And if they're not there at 21, then they're not there. And I'm just like, I've seen enough of it time and time again. Even elite players take time. And I'm not saying Shane Wright's elite, but I think there was way too many people like Scott. He's like the word bust was used, for God's sakes, way too early. That word should not be allowed in a vocabulary for a player in their first 4 years of their career. It's just, to me, it's way too soon, way too often. Right? I get that people like it to get it, but I think it's the one thing that gets overused way too often. It's hard, man. It is really hard league. And especially for a lot of young guys. And because a lot of young guys, some of them have never dealt with any sort of real adversity. They've always been dominant players. You talked about Bedard earlier. He's a stick snapping machine. Well, that's just frustration, because he's never been like, what the hell? I'm not producing. And I get it. He has a high level internally to reach a bar to. But just because you dominated at every other level doesn't mean you dominate the NHL, man. It's a humbling league, right? Just like any pro league. So, but in the NHL, I find
Shane Wright, just for everyone's numbers' sake, in case I'll save you from looking it up, he didn't have any goals in his first 17 games of the year. He now has 6 in his last 8. So even counting the hot streak,
he's got 7.
What's that?
He's got 7 goals this season.
Oh, okay. Sorry. 7 goals this year. Oh, the stat page I'm looking at has 6. He's on pace for 30 points. You said this year would be closer to 57. Did you not?
Yeah, because I said no, I never said close to 57. I said I think he'll get close to 50. 45 to 50 is what I said.
Okay. He's on track for 30.
He's heating up.
Okay, Tyler has it here. It's timestamped October 11th, 2024. Gregor says 50 points for Shane Wright. Frank says 34. He's on pace for 30. Do you want to see? You come in here and you want to knock me. Do you want to revise your bet at all?
Not at all. He's heating up. I have no problem with it. Okay. How many goals Matty Beniers have? That's your guy. 4.
Matty Beniers already has a 57-point season under his belt. The whole point was Matty Beniers is a better player than Shane Wright will ever be.
Well, okay, we'll see. We shall see. Now, one other quick one. The Cirelli injury, I don't know if you saw it last night, Frank. That looked like maybe a hit pointer all day. He got rocked right, and it hit on his hip bone kind of right at the top of the boards in Vancouver last night. Did not return, and you wonder that Tampa's in Edmonton tomorrow, I think it is, but that's something to monitor for Tampa, because Cirelli's been really good for that team, and he plays he probably would have got the McDavid matchup a lot, because he gets a lot of tough matchups, and they might not have him, and because that you get rocked like that, you saw him kind of go backwards. You could see immediate discomfort. Now maybe it's just a bruise, but we've seen guys get hit like that and then they miss a few weeks for sure, because it was it was not pretty. That'd be a big loss for them. He's been playing really well.
Yeah, I think the more interesting question is if he's out for a sustained period of time, does that put any of his formations in jeopardy?
Well, I think as long as he would,
there's still so much runway. Like we're talking 9 weeks now between now and the tournament, but we're now at the time of year that any guy that has any significant injury, and I'm not saying it is, look, we've seen plenty this year that look really significant that end up not being it. I mean, for God's sakes, Patrick Laine is already back playing. I thought in the preseason when he took that hit to his knee that we were not seeing Patrick Laine again until sometime in 2025. And even last week, we talked about on the pod with the Zegras injury, hey, that looks like it might be an Achilles, not an Achilles. So I guess I've learned to not play doctor based on what you see.
Well, they just got Kucherov back, and man, him and Point absolutely just, he comes back. When that guy comes back from an injury, there's never any rust. And him and Point looked amazing yesterday against Vancouver. So when you look at great duos in the league, they're right up there, man. They are right up there. So that makes Tampa Bay just a naturally scarier team again. So be interesting to see them and their week. They got a road trip where it's no back-to-back, so it's not a terrible road trip when they go out west. They're playing every second day, so they should be a hard out. And I look at them like Boston is 7-2, I think, since the coaching change. Like they've moved up into third place. Are you buying the Bruins? Is this like the coach's bump and they'll come back a bit, or are they this good now?
No, I've said literally consistently all season long, the Bruins are a good team. Start to finish, I've said it. You can rewind it even when they made the coaching change. I think a good team that lost their way. I'm not saying it's all the coach. I wonder how much of the success they would have had even with Jim Montgomery still there. But nonetheless, this is a good team that was underachieving. I wouldn't say the same now, and I was saying it to start, about the Preds. The Preds are lost. I'd be real surprised if we get to Thursday and the Preds haven't made some sort of move. Whether it's Thursday. A trade, whether it's
that because of now. Speaking before I let you go, Board of Governors, what's on tap?
First off, you never really know. Feels like not that long ago that I was at one of these and we got a surprise announcement that they were opening a ticket sales drive for Vegas, which ended up being the Golden Knights. They wanted to test the market. There will be salary cap and CBA talk. There will be, I'm sure, at least some sort of in the executive committee, which is the smaller Board of Governors group, some talk about expansion because it's going to happen at some point. My guess is sometime after a new CBA is signed. And yeah, they're prepping for these negotiations now, which are scheduled to start in the new year. This is their last Board of Governors meeting until then. The PA is finishing up their fall tour, and Marty Walsh is meeting with a couple more teams this week. And it's go time for the next CBA. They're putting the last finishing touches on their prep to then begin negotiations.
Well, and hopefully it's smooth sailing in that regard. I think we can all agree. Owners, players, fans, media, the last thing the NHL needs is any sort of labor strife again. Just figure it out. And it seems to be on a pretty good course, and hopefully it stays that way and it's seamless and they get it done a year in advance. And so there doesn't have to be any talk. I think the last thing the NHL needs is to go into the final season and you get to, this time next year and there's no deal done. And then it just becomes conversation again. And because past history, if it was other leagues, you'd be like, man, maybe not. But the NHL's past history and their willingness to actually go and have seasons shortened, have seasons completely canceled. It's not something that the NHL should want or hope or need. And you hope you get a deal done this summer, ideally.
Even before that would be amazing.
Oh, before the playoffs?
Not holding that breath.
No. I would be quite surprised. Enjoy the Board of Governor meetings. Enjoy the sun. That was the Rundown, episode 342, brought to you by Bet 365, and Fountain Tire.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.